make that a bit neutral. Okay, my name's A.W. Peet. I am a little bit like a learner driver in a panel full of Formula One racers. I'm just a theoretical subatomic physicist. I don't actually have any research experience in the subject in today's discussion, so I just have to acknowledge that I'm really uneducated on this. But my lived experience was for about 45 years of misogyny, and I also have many years of experience living ableism, and transphobia is a bit newer, as I didn't come out until relatively recently. Anyway, I'm from Aotearoa, also known as New Zealand, which is why I have a small amount of knowledge about Polynesia. I studied Maori language, which is the indigenous language in Aotearoa, when I was an undergraduate, just for 1 year, and I've forgotten most of the vocabulary, I'm afraid. But when we introduce ourselves in Aotearoa, we say a little pepeha, which says a little bit about where we're from. I'm not going to go on about it, but I will mention the name of my mountain and the name of my river, because that places me where I come from. So my mountain is Aoraki, which is the tallest mountain in New Zealand. It's in South Island, where I'm from, and the Waimakariri is my river, and those are parts of my being as a physicist. So I do have the view of the universe of a theoretical physicist who works on quantum black holes and other sexy stuff like that. But I also have a view of cosmology that's a little bit informed by having had an experience in growing up in a country where we have a little bit more respect for our indigenous folks, just a little bit. We also have something like 14% of the population in New Zealand is Maori, and if you count Pacifica peoples as well, makes up almost a quarter of the population of Aotearoa, and that makes it a little different in terms of how we think. But what I do to try to make transpositive teaching in my department. I haven't been doing it for very long, so again, I'm a relative beginner. Physicists don't tend to have a particularly good education as social justice people when we're undergraduates, and that means that faculty members, colleagues, for example, as well as current students, aren't studying trans studies or women's studies or sociology or other subjects that are rather relevant. So it means that we are also kind of a bit ignorant about it, but it also means we're not really know-it-alls about it either. So when we do have a discussion, there's room for teaching people and for swaying opinion, and that's one of the things that I think is important. So I've only been able, because I'm not an expert in any of this, to take a bit more of a micro approach to trying to influence people, and I've put some of my essays on the web. So I've got an essay about being transgender. I actually wrote it for long-standing physics colleagues who were going to meet me at a conference this summer and see maybe a little bit of whisker on my chin, or hear the pitch of my voice being completely different. Some people didn't even recognize me, which was quite shocking, actually. I'm exactly the same person. My New Zealander affected accent is exactly the same, but the pitch is different, so, well, you can still recognize me from the accent. I put some essay on about being trans. I have another one about being a person with disabilities. In my own teaching in my classroom, I try to make sure in the very first class that I establish some sort of ground rules of not conduct policing, more just saying that I want people to be decent to each other in my classroom. And if you do some of these things, then I will not be cool with it. And so I have a statement of what I expect from students at the beginning, so that if any of them were disruptive later on, it actually hasn't become necessary to use it. But you can point at the rule book and say, out. You're violating these rules, so would you please leave the classroom to allow the rest of the students to do the learning that they came here to do? And if you're not really in the mood to cooperate, then there are other places where you might prefer to be, and we would prefer you to be in one of those places too. But, you know, I mean, I'm just trying to be quick, because I would be a lot more diplomatic than that with an actual student. But one of the things I'd like to make a comment on in regard to non-binariness is that bigotry is not a binary variable any more than gender is. And neither is inclusion. So we are always trying to strive to improve on a sort of a continuum. You know, it's not that some of us are really great at inclusion and some of us are really terrible. You know, that's a silly binary. I'd like to smash as many binaries in nature as I possibly can. I think I've found one that I don't want to smash, which is the idea of transparency. You either are transparent or you're not. You know, if you're partly opaque, then that makes you opaque. So I think that's one example of a binary that I don't want to smash. But most of other binaries I'm not really very much in favor of. So that's just, you know, my personal experience there. So I did have made responses in certain situations where I feel people have been a wee bit irresponsible. I wonder, have very many people in the room, could I have a show of hands, who've seen my little video about quantum mechanics? And okay, so a lot of you have actually seen it, but I thought I might just mention a slight amount about it. You can obviously go watch the whole thing if you like, but I'm just kind of proud of it. So it's about the only example of transpositive teaching I actually have to offer as a theoretical physicist, so I thought I should make it part of my presentation at least. So I was actually standing in class in one of my 199 seminar classes. I really enjoyed teaching these. I initially taught it as a year-long thing, but then physics said, well, we would kind of like you to do some other undergraduate teaching as well in some other courses, so would you like to do it in a half-year format? And but I'm amazed that various of my colleagues in physics aren't fighting me for doing this 199. It's amazing. So I try to teach them about modern physics, but certainly with no calculus and definitely with no algebra. So it puts my hands behind my back with regard to not being able to use many of the tools of my trade. But it means that just sometimes I'm standing there inside the classroom trying to get across some concept of physics, not being allowed to use equations or anything to do it, and sometimes an idea just pops into my head. So I'm standing there, I haven't actually disclosed to my students yet that I'm non-binary, but I'm trying to teach them about particle-wave duality in quantum mechanics. It's this thing that all students of quantum mechanics and physics have to wrestle with, and it's completely counterintuitive, but it's the way nature works. So you sort of have to just get used to it and learn it and get to feel comfortable with it. And once you get over it, quantum mechanics is actually really fun. And you can learn a lot of really cool stuff about it. Like including the technology that makes your cell phone go and keeps your GPSs sending you to the right place, not falling into the ocean and, all that sort of stuff. So I was desperate for an analogy to sort of say, well, sometimes an electron may look like a wave if you do an experiment that can probe its wave-like behaviors, but other experiments that might not be sensitive to the fine details would see it much like a little marble or a little, classical particle. And so the electron actually has the wave-like behaviors and the particle-like behaviors, but it is a wavicle. It has both. So I tried using the wavicle analogy for a while, and some of them weren't quite having it. And I don't like portmanteaus or smushed up words. I'm not a very good inventor of words. And then I was thinking, oh, well, it's just like being non-binary. I'm a non-binary person, and they're going, like this, and I've got their attention, right? So at this moment, I can teach them about quantum wave particle duality. This is on the line here, right? I can either do this or I've failed in teaching this. I'm like, shit. And so I said, well, it's like me. I have feminine aspects and masculine aspects, and they are part of me as a whole human being. By the way, I'm not broken. And so I have masculine-feminine duality. Big deal. You can just get over the fact that I'm a non-binary person and get on with, doing stuff in the universe. And once you've got over it, then it's really not really any much of a big deal. And they were like, oh, well, wave-particle duality is not a very big deal, because definitely being non-binary is an NBD for these young folks. For some of my colleagues in physics, the older folks, it's a VBD, a very big deal. And one of the really expert people on the panel is going to be training some of my colleagues next week about how to support me better as a transgender and non-binary professor. And it's wonderful that the U of T provides this sort of support for people like me. And that brings me back to something that Brenda said at the beginning about the privilege of tenure. And I'd like to stand here and openly acknowledge that what I've been able to do in the last 8 days, which we're not talking about, is entirely predicated on me having that privilege. I am not part of the precariat. Several members of the parts of the precariat have contacted me to express appreciation, and those loving comments from those people have kept me afloat while all the cannons of all these mean, awful people have been firing. And that's something that we, there's a duty of care there that people are carrying out. So I think that's something that I want to get across to my students in my teaching, and I try to do it pretty much every class in one way or another, to the limited extent you can in a physics context. I'm here for you, that's my job. If you don't want me to care about your situation or provide extra help, that's your call. You're a grown adult, you get to make your own decisions about when you want to muster support from people around you. But if you want my help, I will give it up until the limits of my physical and emotional capacity. That is my job after all, right? And U of T has backed me up to the hilt in coming out as transgender. Medical care does support hormones for faculty members too, it turns out, for example. And, you know, I've had all sorts of support from a lot of really good people at U of T whose jobs are to support people like me. And that's because I have tenure. It's not only because I have tenure, but it makes it so much easier for them to offer that support because I've already built my own reputation within the academic community. What I'm more worried about is the students who don't yet have those privileges like I do, and who's sticking up for them, you know? And so we all have a duty of care for everybody, whether we like the politics of that person or not. And so let's all just try to have an outbreak of decency and, you know, like be really loving to each other and be concerned about the emotional health of our graduate students, not destroying them every time they come into our office for a meeting every week to tell us about the progress they've been having. I've discovered that if you actually have a care for the students, they reciprocate like mad. I have had mad support from some of the students in my department. I won't say which kind because it might identify them. But, you know, cis, white, able-bodied, heterosexual, you know, very ordinary, privileged person, massive support. So you just never quite know where it's going to come from. So, you know, thank you all for having me here. It's been such a privilege being part of a Formula One race. And just so many hats off to all the people who have expertise, who are, you know, teaching us how to be more welcoming at U of T. And I'm so excited by the inclusion feel I have in this room from sources I've been hearing from over the last few days. So thank you all.